Pope Francis was loved by millions across the globe because he believed everyone deserved hope and God's love, no matter their race, sexuality, or beliefs. Unfortunately, some hardcore faithfuls and even elements within the Vatican didn't agree with his progressive views, leading to serious backlash. Now the Pope is dead, and the Vatican is in full-blown panic as they struggle to handle the fallout. Fingers are being pointed, questions are being asked, and we've got exclusive information about what's really going on inside Vatican City. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe. We're growing quickly and are close to reaching 2,000 subscribers. Your support helps us continue bringing you mysterious prophecies and untold stories. Let's get to it. The Vatican scrambles after the Pope dies. On Easter Monday, April 21, 2025, at precisely 9:45 a.m., Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Camileno of the Apostolic Chamber, stepped forward to deliver news that would resonate throughout the Catholic world and beyond. For Nostro Francesco. With these solemn words, Cardinal Farrell officially confirmed what many had feared. Pope Francis had passed away at 7:35 a.m. that very morning. The announcement came from the Casa Santa Marta, where the pontiff had chosen to reside throughout his papacy, issuing the traditional papal apartments in favor of more modest accommodations, a choice that had come to symbolize his humble approach to leadership. The death was verified according to Vatican protocol, with the head of the Vatican's health department present alongside Cardinal Farrell for the formal rite of ascertainment. This solemn procedure took place in the chapel of the Doa Sanct Mate, marking the official beginning of a period known as sede vacante, the vacant seat. But what led to this moment? Let's take a step back and look at Pope Francis's final days, which proved to be as remarkable and dedicated as the life he had led. Pope Francis's health had been declining for some time. On February 14, 2025, he was admitted to Rome's Yali Hospital with what was initially described as a respiratory crisis. This condition rapidly developed into a serious case of double pneumonia, leading to what would become his longest hospitalization during his 12-year papacy, a remarkable 38 days. 4 days after his admission, the Vatican confirmed the gravity of his condition. Bilateral pneumonia had left the pontiff in critical condition at various points during his treatment. Despite this challenging diagnosis, he was eventually discharged on March 23, 2025, returning to his duties with his characteristic determination, albeit visibly weakened. What makes Pope Francis's final days particularly poignant was his insistence on fulfilling his Easter duties, the most sacred period in the Catholic liturgical calendar. Despite expectations that he would need to skip the Holy Week events due to his frail health, Francis surprised many by making what would become his final public appearance on Easter Sunday, April 20, 2025. This appearance was both moving and symbolic. Though too weak to celebrate the Easter Mass himself, that duty fell to Cardinal Angelo Camastri. Francis insisted on participating in a Pope mobile tour of St. Peter's Square following the service. Observers noted that he was visibly frail, requiring the support of aides. Yet he managed to wave gently to the thousands of faithful gathered in the square and delivered a quiet Happy Easter during the traditional Urbi blessing from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. In what would be his final Easter message to the world, Pope Francis once again demonstrated his deep concern for global conflicts, particularly the ongoing situation in Gaza. His passionate plea for peace resonated with many. Manitaria. This final appeal for peace and reconciliation was entirely in keeping with the themes that had defined his papacy: compassion for the marginalized, advocacy for peace, and a consistent call for dialogue between conflicting parties. Perhaps most remarkably, hours before his death, Pope Francis held one final official meeting, a brief but notable encounter with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, a recent convert to Catholicism. During this meeting, which took place at the Vatican on Easter Sunday, Francis exchanged Easter greetings with Vance and presented him with gifts, including rosaries, a Vatican tie, and 3 large chocolate Easter eggs for his children. Some observers noted that the meeting had an awkward quality, given Francis's previous criticisms of the Trump administration's immigration policies, particularly its mass deportation plans. Nevertheless, this final diplomatic encounter showcased Francis's willingness to engage with political figures across ideological divides, a hallmark of his approach to the papacy. Following his death, Vatican protocols were immediately set in motion. The head of the Vatican Health Service examined his body to confirm the cause of death and prepare the necessary report. No autopsy was performed in keeping with Vatican tradition for deceased popes. Later that same day, Cardinal Farrell, in his role as Camillano, oversaw the placement of Pope Francis's body in a zinc-lined wooden coffin. Following tradition, the Pope was dressed in red vestments with his mitre and pallium set aside. This solemn preparation took place in the chapel of the Domus Sancti Martha at 8 a.m. On April 21st, one of the most symbolic acts followed, the breaking of the fisherman's ring, a ritual designed to prevent any misuse of papal authority after death. Cardinal Farrell performed this ritual using a special hammer, striking the ring that had become a symbol of Francis's authority. In another traditional act, the Camillino sealed Pope Francis's residence in the Casa Santa Marta. While historically this practice was intended to prevent looting of papal apartments, it now serves as a symbolic gesture marking the end of a papacy. The announcement of Pope Francis's death prompted an immediate outpouring of grief and tributes from around the world. Crowds began gathering in St. Peter's Square within hours of the announcement, many in tears, others in silent prayer. World leaders quickly issued statements of condolence. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who had met with the Pope just hours before his death, expressed his shock and sadness at the news. Italian Prime Minister George Meloni praised Francis for his dedication to the marginalized and his efforts toward peace. In Argentina, Francis's homeland, the news was met with particular grief. Special masses were quickly organized throughout the country to honor their native son, who had risen from humble beginnings to become the first Latin American pope. The cultural impact was felt immediately in various spheres. In Italy, the National Soccer League announced the postponement of matches as a sign of respect, reflecting the depth of national mourning. As news of Francis's death spread, attention naturally turned to what would come next. The Vatican, operating according to protocols developed over centuries, had already begun the complex process of mourning the deceased pontiff while preparing for the selection of his successor. What will happen next? Vatican takes next steps. The Vatican declared the beginning of a 9-day mourning period known traditionally as the Novenial. This period, deeply rooted in Catholic tradition, serves multiple purposes. It allows the faithful time to mourn. It provides space for reflection on the late Pope's legacy, and it enables the practical arrangements necessary for the funeral and subsequent conclave. During these 9 days, daily prayers and requiem masses are held not only in Rome, but in Catholic parishes worldwide. These services unite the global Catholic community in grief and remembrance, creating a spiritual connection between the center of the Church in Rome and its far-flung members across continents. A central aspect of the Novenial is the public viewing of the Pope's body, allowing the faithful to pay their final respects. According to the Vatican's announcement, Pope Francis's body was scheduled to be transferred to St. Peter's Basilica on April 23, 2025 for public veneration. The specific arrangements for this public viewing were to be finalized by the College of Cardinals who assume certain administrative responsibilities during the S. Vacanti period. The public viewing typically draws massive crowds, with the faithful often waiting in line for hours to spend just a few moments in the presence of the deceased pontiff. For many Catholics, this represents a deeply significant spiritual experience and a way to personally connect with the passing of a beloved leader. The 9-day mourning period overlaps with what is known as sed vacante, literally the vacant seat. This is the formal term for the period between a pope's death and the election of his successor, and it triggers specific governance arrangements designed to ensure continuity in the Church's operations. During sedicante, the College of Cardinals, led by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, as Camileno assumes temporary administration of the Church. Their authority, however, is limited to handling routine matters. Major decisions and initiatives are typically postponed until a new pope is elected. An interesting aspect of this transitional period is the change in Vatican leadership. Most Vatican department heads, known as dicaster prefects, resign their positions upon a pope's death. They continue functioning in a caretaker capacity, but must await the new pope's confirmation or replacement once he is elected. This transitional governance structure reflects the Catholic Church's unique blend of tradition and practicality. While ensuring that essential functions continue, it also acknowledges that the incoming pope should have the freedom to select his own leadership team and set his own priorities. As cardinals from around the world began traveling to Rome, they started holding daily meetings known as general congregations. These meetings serve multiple purposes. They allow the cardinals to discuss current church matters, address immediate needs, and begin the delicate process of considering the desired qualities in the next pope. These congregations, while formal in nature, are also complemented by informal discussions and private meetings among cardinals. These more casual conversations often prove significant in shaping alliances and perspectives before the conclave officially begins. The dynamics of these pre-conclave discussions can have a profound impact on the eventual outcome of the papal election. Perhaps one of the most notable aspects of the mourning period for Pope Francis is the nature of the funeral arrangements themselves. In keeping with his lifelong emphasis on simplicity and humility, Francis had made specific requests regarding his funeral rites that represent a departure from traditional papal practices. In 2024, Pope Francis updated the papal funeral rites to reflect his vision of humility and simplicity. Among the changes he implemented was the removal of the raised catapult, traditionally used to elevate the papal coffin during funeral ceremonies. This change was symbolic of his desire to be remembered primarily as a pastor rather than as a worldly ruler or sovereign. Francis also specified that he wished to be buried in a single wooden coffin rather than the traditional 3 coffins used for papal burials. Traditionally, a pope's body would be placed in a cypress coffin, which would then be enclosed in a lead coffin, and finally in an oak casket. Francis's preference for a single simple coffin reflects the same spirit of modesty characterized his decision to live in the Casa Santa Marta rather than the Apostolic Palace. Perhaps most surprisingly, Francis requested burial at Rome's St. How, Mary Major Basilica, Santa Maria Major, rather than in the Vatican grotto beneath St. Peter's Basilica, where most modern popes are interred. This basilica held special significance for Francis, who would often visit it before and after his international trips to pray before the icon of Mary, known as Salis, popularly Romani Protectress of the Roman people. The funeral mass itself, expected to be held between April 25th and 27th, 2025, 4 to 6 days after his death was planned for St. Peter's Square. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, as Dean of the College of Cardinals, was designated to lead the ceremony. It's worth noting that Pope Francis had taken steps to ensure Cardinal Re remained in this position by extending his term as dean. This decision made before his death was seen by some as a strategic move to ensure that a figure aligned with his vision would oversee both his funeral rites and the preparations for the conclave. Given the ideological divisions within the Church that had become increasingly apparent during Francis's papacy, this move was interpreted as an attempt to safeguard his progressive legacy during the transition period. The period following a pope's death is not merely about mourning and ceremony. It also involves subtle but important considerations about legacy and influence. Francis, like his predecessors, appears to have been mindful of how his funeral arrangements and the transition process might impact the Church's direction after his departure. By simplifying the funeral rites and emphasizing his identity as a pastor rather than a sovereign, Francis sent a posthumous message, consistent with the themes of his papacy: humility, simplicity, and a focus on service rather than power or prestige. These choices stand as a final testament to his vision for the Church and its leadership. Similarly, his decision to extend Cardinal Rie's term as dean ensures that a trusted figure oversees both the funeral ceremonies and the initial preparations for the conclave. This could be seen as an attempt to provide continuity and stability during the transition period, particularly in a church that had experienced increased polarization during Francis's tenure. These considerations take on added significance when we consider the composition of the College of Cardinals that will elect Francis's successor. Over his 12-year papacy, Francis appointed nearly 80% of the current cardinal electors. This remarkable reshaping of the college potentially favors the election of a successor who shares Francis's progressive vision for the Church. However, as Vatican observers often note, conclaves are notoriously unpredictable. There is a famous saying in church circles: "He who enters a conclave as a pope leaves it as a cardinal," meaning that presumed frontrunners often fail to secure election. Despite Francis's influence on the composition of the college, the private deliberations and the Holy Spirit's guidance, as Catholics believe, can lead to surprising outcomes. As the Vatican takes steps to bury Pope Francis, a conclave is taking shape, leaving global faithful to ask the all-important question: who will be the next pope? The conclave and potential successors. The term conclave derives from the Latin conclave, meaning with a key, reflecting the traditional locking of cardinals within the Keen Chapel until they reach a decision. This practice, established in the 13th century after a particularly protracted papal election, underscores the gravity of the task and the importance of insulating the process from outside influences. According to Vatican protocols, the conclave to elect Pope Francis's successor is expected to begin between 15 and 20 days after his death. This places the likely start date between May 6th and May 11th, 2025. This interval allows time for all eligible cardinals to travel to Rome for the completion of funeral ceremonies and for the general congregations to conclude their discussions. The composition of the voting body is precisely defined. Only cardinals under the age of 80 are eligible to participate in the conclave. At the time of Francis's death, this group numbered approximately 120 cardinals from around the world. The age restriction established by Pope Paul VI in 1970 ensures that the electors are still active in church leadership. One of the most significant aspects of the upcoming conclave is the makeup of the College of Cardinals. Francis appointed nearly 80% of the current electors during his 12-year papacy. This remarkable reshaping of the college has led many observers to suggest that the next pope is likely to continue Francis's progressive trajectory, as the cardinals he elevated presumably share his vision for the Church's future. However, Vatican experts caution against assuming that cardinals vote along ideological lines. The dynamics within the conclave are complex, influenced by personal relationships, regional considerations, and the private discernment of each cardinal. The famous saying, "He who enters a conclave as a pope leaves it as a cardinal," reminds us that presumed frontrunners often fail to secure election. When the conclave begins, the cardinals will take up residence in St. Martha's House du Sancta Marthi, the Vatican guest house, where, ironically, Pope Francis chose to live throughout his papacy. From there they will proceed each day to the Sion Chapel, where the voting takes place. Before entering conclave, each cardinal takes a solemn oath of secrecy, vowing to maintain absolute confidentiality about the proceedings. The penalty for breaking this oath is excommunication. underlining the Church's view of the sacred nature of the process. Once secluded, the cardinals are cut off from the outside world. No phones, internet access, or communications devices are permitted. The Siene Chapel and surrounding areas are swept for electronic listening devices, and signal jammers are employed to prevent any breach of security. This isolation ensures that the cardinals can deliberate free from external pressures or influences. The voting itself follows a precise protocol. Each cardinal writes the name of his chosen candidate on a ballot, approaches the altar, places the folded ballot on a plate, and then tips it into a specially designed urn. While doing so, he makes this oath. I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. The voting process is meticulous, with ballots counted and recounted to ensure accuracy. For a pope to be elected, he must receive a 2/3 majority plus one of the votes cast. If no candidate achieves this threshold, additional rounds of voting continue. The cardinals can hold up to 4 voting sessions per day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. After each inconclusive round, the ballots are burned in a special stove with chemicals added to produce black smoke that billows from the Sistine Chapel chimney. This signal informs the waiting world that no pope has yet been elected. When a candidate finally achieves the required majority, the ballots are burned with chemicals that produce white smoke, the famous signal that a new pope has been chosen. Inside the chapel, the elected cardinal is asked, "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" Upon his acceptance, he is asked by what name he wishes to be known as Pope, a tradition dating back to the 6th century. The final public moment comes when the senior cardinal deacon appears on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and proclaims, "Habemus Papam," we have a pope. He then announces the new pope's name, who subsequently appears on the balcony to deliver his first blessing to the city of Rome and the world. The term papabili, literally papables, refers to cardinals considered potential candidates for the papacy. While speculation about papabili is a favorite pastime of Vatican observers and the media, it's important to note that such predictions often miss the mark. Nevertheless, several names have emerged as possible successors to Francis based on their prominence, experience, and alignment with various currents within the Church. Cardinal Peter Turpin of Ghana has been mentioned as a potential candidate. At 76, Turpin has led several important Vatican departments, including the diocastry for promoting integral human development. His election would represent a historic first, the first pope from sub-Saharan Africa, and would continue Francis's emphasis on elevating leaders from the global south. Cardinal Luis Targal from the Philippines is another frequently mentioned name. Currently serving as pro-prefect of the Dicastery for Evangelization, Targal is known for his charismatic communication style and his alignment with Francis's pastoral approach. At 67, he would bring relative youth to the papacy, and his election would mark the first Asian pope in modern times. From Europe, several possibilities have been discussed, including Cardinal Peter Erdo of Hungary, Cardinal Proin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and Cardinal Matteo Zuppi of Italy, who has been involved in peace initiatives regarding the Ukraine conflict. Other names in circulation include Cardinal Mario Gress of Malta, who has led the Senate of Bishops, and Cardinal Jean-Marc Ayne of France, known for his work in interfaith dialogue. Each of these potential candidates brings different strengths, experiences, and perspectives to the table. The cardinal's ultimate choice will depend on numerous factors: theological outlook, administrative experience, communication skills, age and health, and the ability to navigate the various challenges facing the Church in the 21st century. The conclave will inevitably unfold in the shadow of Francis's complex and contested legacy. His 12-year papacy was marked by significant reforms and initiatives that generated both admiration and controversy. Francis's emphasis on mercy, inclusivity, and social justice won him admirers worldwide. His advocacy for environmental stewardship exemplified in his encyclical Laudato Si established the Church as a leading voice on climate change. His outreach to marginalized groups and his efforts to decentralize church authority reflected his vision of a church of the people. Yet these same initiatives sparked criticism from traditionalists who viewed some of his actions and statements as departures from established doctrine. His openness on issues like divorce, homosexuality, and interfaith dialogue was seen by some as undermining the Church's moral clarity. The approval of fiducia supplicants in December 2023, allowing pastoral blessings for same-sex couples, was particularly controversial, with some bishops openly rejecting the document. The tensions that characterized Francis's papacy will inevitably influence the conclave discussions. The cardinals will need to discern not only who can best lead the Church forward, but also how to address the polarization that has emerged during Francis's tenure. Should they elect someone who will continue and perhaps accelerate his reforms? Or should they choose a figure who might seek a more moderate path, or even a return to traditional approaches? This question is complicated by the fact that while Francis appointed the vast majority of voting cardinals, this doesn't guarantee ideological alignment. Many of his appointees, particularly those from the global south, may hold traditional views on sexual morality, while sharing Francis's progressive stance on social justice and environmental issues. This complexity defies simple categorization as liberal or conservative. One unique aspect of the upcoming conclave is that it follows a period where the Church experienced the unprecedented situation of having two living popes, Benedict XVI, who resigned in 2013, and Francis. With Benedict's death in December 2022, that anomalous situation ended, but its effects linger in the Church's collective memory. The dynamic between Francis and the Pope Emeritus was generally respectful but occasionally complex, as their different theological visions sometimes created the perception of competing centers of authority. The next pope will not face the challenge of navigating a relationship with a predecessor, but the possibility of papal resignation has now been established as a legitimate option. This raises the question of whether future popes, including Francis's successor, might consider resignation a normal part of papal succession rather than an extraordinary exception. The age and health of papal candidates may take on added significance if cardinals anticipate the possibility of another resignation rather than a lifetime appointment. What is certain is that the new pope will inherit a church transformed by Francis's 12-year papacy, a church that has become more attentive to the peripheries, more engaged with contemporary social issues, and more willing to examine its own structures and practices. Yet, he will also inherit a church that continues to grapple with internal divisions, institutional challenges, and the complex task of proclaiming the gospel in a rapidly changing world. As we conclude our exploration of the steps following Pope Francis's death, we're reminded that even these ancient traditions and protocols serve a purpose beyond mere continuity. They provide a framework within which the Church discerns its future path. Guided by the belief that beyond the human deliberations in the Chine Chapel, a divine hand ultimately shapes the outcome. Hello, Universal in particular margin. Thank you for watching.